Today, I'm playing poker with a bunch of friends and fans here to celebrate hitting 100,000 subscribers. Downside, I'm coming off my biggest loss ever. So will I make a comeback, or will I spiral down the poker abyss, inching towards bankruptcy? Let's find out. Let's start things off with 6-7 of clubs in the low jack. There's a straddle, so I open it up to $20 and get called by the small blind, big blind, and straddle. 4 ways to a flop of queen, 8, 9, 2 hearts, and the big blind decides to lead out for $15. It's pretty cheap. I have a straight draw, a backdoor flush draw, I'm in position, I make the call, the small blind calls 2, and the turn is a 5. Boom! Just miraculous, hitting the straight. Action checks to me. I'm definitely gonna bet. I bet $75. I'm targeting a queen, flush draws, maybe a pair plus draw. Anyway, only the small blind calls and the river is the ace of hearts. It's a pretty bad river. The flush comes in and a queen is less likely to pay me off for another bet. He checks and I debate between betting or checking. I don't really think worse hands are gonna call that often. There's definitely a possibility he could have a flush or a better straight. I just check back. He shows ace 9 for a rivered 2 pair, which is hard to see because he likely would have called another bet, but it's hard to put him on a rivered 2 pair. It's a meetup game, so I'll be changing tables as the host, and here is a PLO double board bomb pot where I pick up jack 9, 8, 7. Here's the flops. As you can see, I have a pair of 8s on one board and nothing on the other board. We all decide to check, and the turns come a jack and the 5 of hearts. Now this is interesting. I turned top 2 pair on one board, and on the other, I now have a flush draw and a gut shot to the nut straight. Middle position bets $30. There's 2 callers and actions on me. Well, no one was interested on the flop, so they can't be that strong, right? I'm putting on max pressure. I raise to $150. But then the button jams for $600. The next guy goes all in for $275. The 2 middle position callers decide their hands are also good enough now. They both go all in for about $300. I have no clue what's happening. 4 people are all in. This is bananas. I only have 2 pair on one board and a couple of draws in the other. What the heck is everyone getting in here with? The more I think about it, the more I think my 2 pair on the one board actually might be good. I'm only beat by sets, and there's only 2 jacks out there, 2 8s, 2 2s, and with all these people jamming, there are probably multiple people with a 3 who have a straight. So, all right, screw it, I'm in 2. The rivers come out a 2 and a 5. I end up winning half the pot with jack 8. My neighbor ends up winning the other half with ace 5 for a rivered full house. And then I guess there were a bunch of people who had 3-6 for the straight. Moving on, I pick up 9-10 of clubs in the cutoff. I open at $20 over a straddle and get called by the button, small blind, and straddle. 4 ways to a flop of jack 9, 4, 2 clubs, just magical, flopping a flush draw and a pair. Action checks to me. I'm gonna start putting money in this pot. I bet $35. Only the small blind calls, and the turn is an offsuit 7. Small blind checks. I think betting or checking is fine, but I decide to bet this time. I bet $75 and he folds. Next, I have 9-7 of hearts in the low jack. I open to $15 and both the hijack and cutoff call. The flop is ace deuce 10 rainbow, a flop that should be pretty decent for my range as the pre-flop raiser. However, I don't like to bluff with nothing in multi-way pots. I think this is a good tip for most people. Bluffing with very little equity against multiple opponents is an easy way to burn money. So I check, and then both of my opponents check behind. The turn is an interesting one, the 8 of hearts. Now I have a flush draw and an open-ended straight draw. On top of that, I have the knowledge that my opponents checked the flop after I already checked. So it's less likely they have an ace. I'm gonna bet big, $50. With this big of a bet, my opponents could easily fold out a 10, an 8, and even if they do call, I have plenty of outs. I'm expecting to take this down most of the time, but doesn't happen. The cutoff calls, and the river is a 10. Now I'm sitting here with 9 high, definitely not winning this hand if I check, but if I bet again, a 10 is never folding. If he slow played an ace, I doubt he's folding. I don't think an 8 would have called my big bet on the turn that often, so sometimes you just have to give up. I check, he checks back, and he shows ace jack for the winner. Then we got pocket queens. In the big blind, there's a $5 straddle, the button limps, the small blind limps, and I raise it up to $25. Straddle calls, button calls, small blind calls, 4 ways to a flop of 6, 8, 9 rainbow. I don't like how connected it is, but I'm still betting with my overpair. I bet $40. The straddle then raises to $80 and it folds back to me. This min raise is super suspect. I'm most likely behind. This guy could have 2 pairs, sets, straights, but I'm not folding yet to a min raise. I make the call and the turn is a jack. I check to the aggressor and he continues betting for $140. I was ready to give it up on most turns, but a jack gives me a gut shot to go along with my overpair. I'm gonna hang in there one more time. I call and the river is a 10. Bink! Holy cow. I hit the straight. Great news. I'm certain I have the best hand. The one bad thing is every hand I put him on, 2 pairs, sets, straights, they're all gonna hate this river. If I check, he's for sure checking back. If I bet big, he's probably folding. So I bet pretty small, $120. He thinks about it, but makes a frustrated call, and I take it down.
Okay, I won't ever do that again, but I had to do this.
Moving on to King Jack in the small blind, the low jack opens to $15, and I'm a firm believer in the aggressive plays. So rather than calling, I'd rather 3-bet. I make it $60 and only the low jack calls. Heads up to a flop of King Deuce 4 rainbow. Nice flop for my hand, good flop for my range. I start off with a small c-bet of $40 and he makes the call. The turn is an 8. I honestly don't think I can go for 3 streets of value against a hand weaker than mine. I check to see what he wants to do and he bets $85. He could have a better hand than me. He could be bluffing because I checked and now he senses weakness. Either way, nothing to do but call, and the river is a 5. Shouldn't change anything, and I check it over once more, ready to call a bet, but he checks back. He says he has nothing, and I take it down. I move into a new table and pick up Queen 10 of clubs in the small blind. The under the gun opens to $20, and I don't want to fold such a pretty hand, but 3-betting the under the gun is pretty scary because he should have a pretty strong range. So I just called to see a flop. The big blind calls 2, and we're 3 ways to a flop of 6, 8, 8, 2 clubs. I check. Big blind checks and under the gun continues for $35. Now, here's the thing. As one of the blinds, I could definitely have an 8 in my range. The under the gun is not going to be opening with too many 8s, so I think it's a good hand to raise. I do have the flush draw, so my hand should still have a good amount of equity if I get called. I make it $105. The big blind folds, the under the gun goes into the tank, but he decides to fold 2 pocket jacks face up. Amazing result, folding out jacks, and we win the pot. Soon after that, I get 4, 5 of clubs in the low jack. The under the gun plus 2 opens to 15. I'm pretty darn deep here, so I make the call, and then the button 3-bets to $45. Under the gun plus 2 calls. I'm getting a good price to call. I'm very deep stacked. I call, and we're 3 ways to a flop of 4, 4 deuce. It's the dream scenario. We check it over to the button, who bets $35, and it folds to me. This is the same opponent as the very last hand. It's deja vu. It's a paired board. He's the aggressor. He bets $35. Last time I raised to 105 and he folded jacks. This time I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I raised to 105. This time I do have it. But mentally, he's probably thinking, no way this guy has it. He did the same thing twice, and sure enough, he rips his entire stack in, $620. I make the call, we run it twice, and he shows Jack 10 offsuit, and I scoop. It's pretty insane. I'm building a monster stack, playing 2-3. If only I ran this good when I shot took. Of course, you guys are only seeing the bigger hands of the night. This session was an 11-hour session, but really, I didn't lose any major pots. Anyway, I pick up ace 10 in the hijack. There's a straddle, so I open to $20 and get called by the cutoff, big blind, and straddle. 4 ways to a flop of King 7-7 rainbow. Action checks to me. I have nothing, and I'm not stone cold bluffing in a multi-way pot, like I said before. Action checks through, and the turn is an ace. Now I do have something. Action checks to me again, and I debate betting, but then I think about it, and what does betting actually accomplish? I think it's an important thing to think about. 4 ways, is someone even going to call if they have a king? I mean, I'll get called by an ace, but I chop with every ace. Someone could even potentially still be lurking with a 7, though that's not super likely, but still, I don't think betting accomplishes that much. So I just check, and the river is a 4. Now the big blind bets out for $75, straddle folds, and it's on me. I was planning on calling a bet on the river, but this is basically a pot-sized bet. If he had an ace, would he be betting the size of the pot hoping to get called by something worse? I think that seems pretty unrealistic. If he had an ace, does he think that a pot-sized bet folds out a different ace so he doesn't have to chop? I also think that's kind of unrealistic. So for those reasons, I don't think he's betting this size with an ace. Could it be a bluff? It might be, but people typically don't just bet pot on the river with a bluff after action checks through the flop and turn. So I just have this feeling he has a slow played 7 or maybe pocket 4s. I fold. I hope I'm right. And I am! He shows 5-7 of clubs for the vlog, so even though I lost, it feels like a major win. All right, last hand of the night, I pick up ace deuce of spades in the big blind. The hijack opens to $20, the small blind calls. I could 3-bet this once in a while, but this time I just call. Defend my blind, pretty standard move. The flop comes deuce 5-7 rainbow. Small blind checks, I check, and the hijack checks back. Turn is a good one, the deuce of diamonds, turning trips. After the small blind checks, I decide to bet. I can't have this checking through again. I bet $30. The hijack calls, then the small blind shoves for $230. Oh, okay, yeah, this is wonderful. I call. Hijack folds. The river, I kid you not, is another deuce. Quads at my own meetup game to end the night. Needless to say, I win the pot. I'm not sure what he had, but we end on a pretty high note. I sold some chips to someone who wanted to buy in, so this isn't all of them, but this is what 11 hours on a 2-3 table amounted to. Pretty sick.
Everyone, subscribe to Bond GTO. He's the best.